So look, let's start. It's just 1 minute after 10:30, and maybe a few more people will continue joining as we're doing this. And as I say, if you're watching this on demand as well, thanks for watching this back. If you're watching it live right now, thanks for joining us. I'm David Smith from Arrow. I'm one of the marketing managers here on the team, looking after Commvault. Just before we sort of properly kick off the webinar, don't panic, you're not going to hear too much from me at all, and in fact I'm going to turn my camera off very shortly as well, so you won't see my face. But just before we do sort of kick off, and I do sort of introduce Mark, who's our main speaker from Commvault, so just a little bit of housekeeping if I could go through that, if I may. There's other people joining as well. So yeah, welcome along. During today's webinar, you are, as an attendee, you will be muted by default and your camera will be off as well. If you've got any questions, if you're not used to, I know many of us are used to Teams as a sort of a normal platform, especially if you are like we are at Arrow in that Microsoft ecosystem. But if you're not used to Teams webinar, there is a slight difference, and you may see up in the top box, so you've got a Q&A button there. So if you've got any questions as we go through the session, please just put those into the Q&A box and submit those, and what we'll do is we'll have a little bit of a Q&A session towards the end as well. So anything that you're thinking of, please just put them in there, and we will answer those as it says there as well. This is being recorded today as well. It's being recorded now, and we are going to put this onto our YouTube channel a little bit later on, hopefully today. We'll then post that onto our main kind of Commvault Webinar Wednesday page as well, so you can go back and watch that on demand, and you can actually go and register for all the other remaining webinars that we've got taking place, which again we'll speak a little bit about those later on. Post webinar as well, any questions that you've got, you can get a hold of the Commvault team here at Arrow, and there's the email address on the page. So I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to hand it straight over to Marc Lucas from Commvault. Good morning, Mark.
Fantastic, and hopefully everybody can hear me okay. In fact, what it might be an idea to do, if you can use the React panel and just give me a thumbs up to let me know like that you can hear me and you can see me. I'm going to, or like David, he'd give me a clap instead, which is fine. I'm going to turn off my camera just to make sure there's no issues with the audio, because I'm presenting from home. Now, what we're going to talk about today is this. I'm going to turn off my camera now. What is it that makes Commvault so different? So this is something I've been talking about over 10 years, although the story when I first started and the story now is fundamentally different. Obviously, you can see there from the strap line there about how we can help your customers recover much faster from a cyber attack. There is that inherent focus around helping your customers be cyber resilient as well, because, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that think about what happened with Marks and Spencer's and the fact that they weren't ready, and the costs, the financial cost, the damage to their reputation that it had. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So there's going to be three main topics of conversation. The first one is a brief focus around the continued impact of cyber attacks. And I'm going to really not drill down on the stuff that you know, the stuff that your customers are probably sick of hearing about. I'm going to talk about stuff that is new. And you'll get a copy of this deck. We'll share it in PDF. So for anybody listening on demand, the email address that David gave out at the beginning, if you can email that, then we'll send you the PDF copy of the deck. Then we're going to talk about, and this is one of the major things that makes Commvault different, this whole concept around minimum viability for their data, recovering that, because that's what's needed, clean data and a clean environment, and also identifying what is the absolute essentials that they need to recover. Let's not recover the entire environment. Let's just cover what we need to run our core business. So we'll delve into that. And then we'll round things off by talking about what it is that makes Commvault different. And there's things in there that have made Commvault different over the 10 years plus that I've been talking about Commvault. And then there's the new cyber resilient features. Although when I say new, we've always been inherently secure. We've built what we've done from the ground up on the NIST principles that I'll mention a little bit later on as well. And then just to wrap things up, summary and next steps as well, and giving you an idea about what the other webinars are going to be as part of this Webinar Wednesday series. So hopefully that agenda sounds good to everybody. And as David said, any questions that you have, pop them in the chat. David's going to keep an eye on that. And if there's any questions, we'll either save them to the end or we will answer them when they're relevant. Okay, so how are things looking like in the UK? Well, I'm not going to talk about how many attacks there are in the UK. Your customers know this. You know this. It's a lot. So let's move away from that Captain Obvious statement. What I will say, though, is if you do need to quote any of this to your customers, there's always a link at the bottom as to where these stats come from as well. So it's relentless for your customers. For me, though, I think there's a couple of other things to really consider for 2025, and really we're in our financial year, we're already in Q2. That the spend on cybersecurity in the UK is crazy. We're well above the average global forecast, which is great news, but you need to make sure that when you're talking to your customers that you are also involving in that conversation, or you get the person that you're talking to reach out to the people who are looking after this security budget, because being able to recover from a cyber attack is absolutely imperative for people in infrastructure and backup, but also for people in security. It's the last line of defense. And if they can work together, fantastic. What it also means, though, is that you'll have access to a bigger budget as well. Now, this report came out very recently from PwC. For me, it doesn't get any better to let your customers know that they are in the majority, that they don't have, or they won't have, every single aspect of what they need to think about regarding being a cyber resilient business. Only 2%, and there were 4,000 security focused people who took part in this survey with PwC. So let them know they're certainly not in the minority, but really the most important step is, okay, what can we do to make sure that you are cyber resilient? And it's not just going to be about data. It's not going to be just about backup or disaster recovery or cyber recovery from a data perspective. It's other things as well that you can talk to them about. And then again, I'm sure you're all aware of this, there's a relentless number of cyber security regulations and data focused regulations that are pointing the finger back to your customer and saying that you need to make sure you've got the relevant steps in place. And in fact, as you probably know with DORA is explicit to businesses in the financial sector or in the financial sector supply chain to say, you need to prove to us that you can recover from a ransomware attack. And for me, I don't think that should be just aimed at customers in the financial sector. It should be aimed at all your customers. This should be second nature to them. So I mentioned about the NIST security framework, so the National Institute of Standards and Technology. When you talk to anyone in the security side of your customer's business, this is where they focus. Identify, protect, and detect. What they don't tend to focus on is, for me, the most important part, which is we've been hit by an attack. How do we recover? And that's very much where Commvault comes in, and making sure that the customers understand that it's not backup and DR that will give them what they need to be cyber resilient. Because backup and DR were designed, the principles of them, well before the whole cyber security threat and ransomware attacks have really, it's not getting any better, it's getting worse. So it's thinking about, with backup and DR, it's not going to give you clean data that you can trust. It could be that the backup infrastructure has been destroyed, because a lot of these ransomware attacks target the backup now. If they've been hit by a really bad attack, it's not just the data that's compromised, it's also their infrastructure as well. So I was having this discussion with one of Commvault's partners yesterday, because the subject of recovery point and recovery time objectives came up. And are they relevant when it comes to cyber recovery? And unfortunately they don't, because again, you cannot trust the data and you cannot trust the infrastructure. So your customer needs to now start thinking about the mean time to clean recovery. I mean, that's too many initials to think about, but what is it that they need to be able to have a clean recovery, and then to get the core minimum part of their business back online? And that's not going to be provided by backup and DR. We're not saying that they need to be thrown away, because backup and DR will continue to be essential for the non-cyber security, cyber attack related types of incidents that take place. But they need to think about backup, DR, and also cyber recovery. And why is cyber recovery such a challenge? It's because there's a lot more complexity involved. There's a fantastic report that I've included the URL to there, which goes into why you need to have a different approach to DR. I mean, as you probably know, with your customers around disaster recovery, they tend to test it on certain parts of the business, or recovering certain parts of data. And of course, with disaster recovery, they don't need to think about, is the data clean? Is the infrastructure also clean as well? So it's a lot more complex. There's a lot more time involved in a cyber recovery as well. But that's a fantastic report to share with your customers, to hopefully make them appreciate that backup and DR don't equal cyber resilience. Okay, so I know that for some of you on this session, I've already talked to you regarding how long it typically takes for your customer to recover from a cyber attack if they don't have the right tools in their Batman's utility belt. And you can see here on average it's 3 weeks plus. And once they've had the attack itself, once they've identified that they've got an event taking place, it's how long would it take them to, put in place their incident response plan. They need to think about the forensic analysis to work out, okay, well, what's just happened? How did we get in? How can we close that back door to make sure it doesn't happen again? Have we had any data breaches? And so on and so on. Then the process starts around the rebuild, and you can see here it's painfully slow. Rebuilding their infrastructure and then doing the actual data recovery. And that becomes even more painful if they have data in the cloud, because when you look at the cloud, so for example, if they have data in AWS or Azure, Google, then it's not just the rebuild of the data or the recovery of the data, it's the recovery of the infrastructure around that data. And that can take 50 to 70% of the work that's needed. So 24 days is not great. And really, that 24 days is, well, that's the amount of time it's going to take to get the minimum, that core minimum viability that I've mentioned before, to get that back online. And it could take them months to actually recover absolutely everything. So I'm going to pause there for a second and just have a quick look at the questions there. So currently no questions at the moment, so please use the chat, please ideally use the Q&A, and we will pick up those questions as we go along. Okay, so I mentioned about M&S earlier. I mean, this isn't news to you. It certainly isn't news to your customers, and I would imagine you've already added this to your conversation when you're talking to your customers about what not to do when it comes to being cyber resilient. So Marks and Spencers, I've talked to many partners who said, yeah, we contacted Marks and Spencer's month. One of them said 18 months to 2 years ago to say about the importance of cyber resiliency, and they just didn't take advantage of that. It was something that they added on their list of things to do. So obviously Scattered Spider got in, and it was a devastating attack that took place. At its height, Marks and Spencer's were losing up to £4 million a day, facing empty shelves. It was a massive damage to their reputation. You can see there more than 1 billion is estimated to have been shaved off their overall market value. And again, this is very much the dictionary definition of closing the door after the horse is bolted, that they're looking at, okay, what can we do to improve our technology, and rapidly increasing that from 2 years to 6 months. And as you can see, they're making immediate changes to their cybersecurity plan. But again, it's had a really big impact on M&S. It's still having that impact. And the story just gets worse, where there's over 300 of their customers who have a class action lawsuit against M&S because of the data breach. And also, and this, I was over at our technical event in Portugal when this hit the news. It took M&S almost twice the average amount of time, 46 days, to get everything back online for their clothing business. I'm sure that really hurt them in many, many ways. And by the way, all those articles and whatever that I brought up, there'll be links to where all that stuff came from as well. Okay, so I've mentioned minimum viability, and minimum viability as a concept is not new, but it's new regarding making sure, and this is something that we've been driving very heavily, making sure your customers appreciate what's involved in making sure that they are ready for that cyber recovery. And minimum viability is a small part of being, but very crucial part of being cyber resilient or continuous business, or however you want to pitch that idea to your customers. So having that minimum viable company, and I've touched on this already, is making sure that they've got the right mixture of apps, data, obviously assets, and people and processes. That's crucial. Having all of that together and identifying all of these steps to then recover what's needed to run their core business after they've had an attack. And there's 3 key principles to this. By the way, there's a really good ultimate guide to minimum viability that we're going to share with you that goes into this in much more detail. The first one is sitting down and thinking, and we're going to break this down in just a moment. What are the core processes, the data, the dependent systems that we need to think about, and really making sure that they've identified all of that. And once they've identified it and they've got their cyber recovery plan in place, then they need to test it, because testing it will really identify that there's not something fundamental that they've forgotten about, that they actually need to include in those core processes and dependent systems as well. I would argue that the second major step for this is something that they probably need to calculate first, because yes, when you propose this is how much being cyber resilient, or this is how you can achieve minimum viability will be, they're probably going to do that inward intake of breath and go, oh, that's a lot of money. But when they then compare the cost of being achieving that minimum viability, or being cyber resilient, which is ideally what they should think about, the whole kit and caboodle, the cost of that compared to the average cost of downtime is a drop in the ocean. And unfortunately, Marks and Spencer's found that out the hard way. And then, as I mentioned before, get it defined and then test to make sure that it's actually going to work and you can trust every single part of your minimum viability recovery process. So, and again, we're going to share this deck with all of you as well. We're going to go into very briefly what are the key principles. And we've touched on some of these already, but I mentioned before about what are the core processes. This will help them define what the absolute foundation is regarding being that minimum viability. What do we need to think about? And again, as I mentioned before, it's systems, data, but also people and processes as well to make sure they can have that recovery. What is that downtime impact? Making sure they've got that recovery plan. We've talked about those first 3 steps, and then it's let's test it. What can we do to automate it? What can we do to audit that process? Because we want to make sure that we can show any internal or external auditors that this process actually works. Then, as part of that process, they should also be factoring in, how can we remediate this? How can we remove the backdoors, the malware? Because if they don't do it, then, as you know, ransomware gangs tend to share the information that we've just had a successful attack against Marks and Spencer's. They'll share it in the community, and other people will try, other ransomware gangs will try to use those backdoors to get in. Typically, you find those who've been hit by a ransomware attack, they're hit by another one pretty soon because that information is shared. And then thinking about what do we have in place around having a clean, isolated environment, that our data is clean, that we're scanning the data to make sure there's no reinfection. And then lastly, it is the bingo buzzwords that you would expect around having the architecture, helping them to have the basics that they should always be thinking about anyway, like encryption, but also immutability, making sure it's not just immutable, but also the data is indelible, which is something that we provide with Air Gap Protect. A clean, sterile incident recovery environment or clean room. Being able to recover data from one platform to another and having that flexibility. And making sure that your backups survive when you have an attack, because that's going to be the first place that you start in the recovery, but it's that cyber recovery that I mentioned before. So this, I think, should be something that's painfully obvious to your customers, breaking down the systems, the data, the people and the processes that they need to identify during that crucial 24 to 72 hours. Ideally, they should be looking at recovering in days, not weeks. So what are going to be the systems, the data, and as I mentioned before, it's backup, it's your day-to-day operational data, it's disaster recovery, but it's also achieving cyber recovery as well. And this is where the testing really comes into its own, that you've mapped out across the whole business what everybody's role is. And this sort of steps outside a little bit regarding minimum viability, but it's being more cyber resilient. What can we do as a company to make sure that we lessen the number of attacks that are coming in, training our staff around looking out for phishing emails? That tends to be the most popular way of getting in. But when it comes to cyber recovery, it's, are the people who are going to be in our incident response team, are they up for the task? Because as I mentioned before, cyber recovery is a completely different, much more complex and lengthy process than traditional DR. So, if your customer hasn't worked out, and I would be wary, or they should be wary if they haven't done this, they should know how much it costs them for an hour of downtime, and then you can convert that into days and weeks, and then convert it into 3 weeks or 21 days to say, look, this is how much you're going to hemorrhage purely based on your downtime if you don't get this sorted out. 24 days. That should then ideally secure your cyber security, your minimum viability budget that your customer needs. And as I mentioned before, this cost of downtime, and let's take into account this doesn't factor in the reputational damage as well. This should then be, okay, well, this is what it's going to cost us. If we don't have this, what you are proposing to them is going to be a drop in the ocean. And then all of those stages will lead to this, a plan that they can test and that they can trust, that they know is going to hit all of the 5 points that you can see here. And this is almost like a run book, especially stages 3, 4, and 5, because you need to be able to recover your data. But obviously stage 2 is about identity, things like Active Directory and Enter ID. And we have a very comprehensive Active Directory and Enter ID recovery, which we're going to talk about in a future session. It's not just recovering Active Directory on a granular basis, it's also recovering the entire forest, which means a much more rapid recovery of your identity access management system like Active Directory or Enter ID. Then once you've got that and you know that the right people are connecting and that they have access, then it's rolling out everything else, including the infrastructure, a clean, sterile infrastructure that you can trust, something that you're going to run on a temporary basis, and then it's going to be recovering your data. So when you're having that initial conversation with your customers on minimum viability, here's some initial questions that you can ask them. And hopefully these are going to help you to sort of penetrate under the layers and get your customers to perhaps realize that they don't have what's in place to be cyber resilient. So the first question that you can see there is, okay, well, what do you have in place to ensure that you're not going to be compromised in any way? Do they have something in place like air gapping or immutability? Have they tested an Active Directory forest level recovery? If they haven't, the official Microsoft guide has 80 to 100 steps. It's very complex. We can automate that process, and we can take what can be recovery that takes days or sometimes even weeks if they follow the more manual process to it being recovered in minutes or hours. So, the next question, some of these are sort of versions of the same thing, but if they did have their cloud environment compromised in a cyber event, how long will it take for them to actually rebuild that? And as I mentioned before, a cloud environment is much more complex than what they've got on-prem. This is an example, and I mentioned this stat earlier, 50 to 70% of cloud recovery in Azure and AWS, Google, is not just the data. Most of that is the configuration, the environment, and using manual tools to do that can take days. How can you make sure that your data is clean and it hasn't actually been infected in the first place? The last thing you want to do is reinfect after you've just cleaned your production environment, for example. And then, do you have the ability to recover to a clean, sterile environment? So these are some of the best practices, and we've touched on some of these already that we're looking at here. So do they have an air-gapped, an indelible copy of their data? Do they know the last time that their data was actually good and it wasn't infected? Are they regularly testing disaster recovery, but more importantly, their cyber recovery plans? Using that isolated recovery environment that I mentioned before, that clean room environment, and having the process for carrying out that forensics in a clean, sterile environment away from your production environment as well. So I mentioned this right at the beginning. We focused heavily on this new concept of minimum viability, but that's a small part. That concentrates on how do I recover from a ransomware attack. If you look here, ideally there's a lot more that they should be thinking about regarding that earlier warning of picking up a suspected attack and lessening the blast radius, or ideally stopping the attack in the first place with things like cyber detection or early warning, and taking that proactive approach and looking at their data, categorizing their data, looking for risks, reducing their footprint. A lot more involved in there. We can help them along every single step of the way. So just to wrap things up then, what is it that makes Commvault different? And this has been announced, the latest Gartner Magic Quadrant report, and for the 14th consecutive year, and by the way, that means that we're in that Leaders Quadrant. We're also the longest running vendor to be recognized as a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So what tends to happen after the Magic Quadrant is published is a couple of weeks, sometimes a month or so after that's published, the Critical Capabilities report comes out. And for the last 5 years that that's taken place, we have been ranked #1 by Gartner, where they take each of the vendors in the leaders section of the Magic Quadrant and they rank them against specific case studies. For me, that is what really matters. How are we going to help customers to recover against those specific use cases? And you can gain a copy of that report. That's last year's report, because this year's hasn't been published, by going to commvault.com. And this is something I'm going to talk about later on, the importance of having that ability to recover anywhere, any data. And we have the best data coverage out there in the market, not just the future-proof workloads or the VMs, apps, databases, unstructured data, cloud. We have more coverage across all of that than anyone else. So that means moving forward, they can use that single platform rather than multiple platforms. And you can see there's obviously a lot of customers that we have there, and big logos, but it's not just customers outside of the UK. There's some fairly big customers that we have within the UK as well. I'm pretty sure that for each one of these, we've got case studies available as well. Okay, so how can you help your customers move away from data chaos? This is more than likely the situation that they're in at the moment. They've started off with one backup tool and they've had to add more when they realize that that backup tool doesn't give them coverage for a new place that they want to put their data. So they get in more and more. Then they need to think about, okay, well, we've just moved data into AWS or Azure or Google. Let's use the cloud native backup, because surely that's the best option. Well, actually it's not. It won't dedupe the data. There's not as much security involved. And typically, if you're using Azure cloud native backup, it wants to keep you in that Azure ecosystem. So lots of tools for different types of workloads. And then that doesn't even take into account when you have an attack. Well, these solutions that you have here don't knit together, they don't integrate together. So that's going to make the recovery process even more painful. And do those tools give you the ability for things like a clean room or isolated recovery environment? Do they enable you, your customers, to have access to a clean copy of their data as well, and to prevent reinfection? So that's very much where Commvault comes in. That single pane of glass that I've been banging on about for 10 plus years is incredibly important. But that is built on zero trust, immutable storage. And it's also, we've been talking about AI and automation and machine learning. We've had that built into our solution since 2016. But having that single holistic platform means that your customers are going to make a significant saving compared to using multiple tools. Plus, it's going to help them be more sustainable as well. Having security and being ready as well, having the right tools. Not all of these tools are included as standard, but they're add-ons, things like air gap, immutability, and that indelible storage that I talked about before. There's over 150 security layers built into Commvault. So these are some of the solutions that you can see here on the bottom left-hand side that we're going to be focusing on over the coming weeks with this Webinar Wednesday series. Clean room recovery, that clean, sterile, pay-as-you-go, isolated recovery environment threat scan, scanning the data when it's being backed up, identifying something that's suspect, and then giving your customers a timeline that they can use to rewind to identify last known good. And Cloud Rewind, we talked about how complex it is to recover those public cloud environments. Cloud Rewind makes that much easier, much more automated, and much faster. And then again, for me, the two things that have been built into Commvault is that single platform, but also having the best data coverage. And when you get this, the PDF version of the deck, you can click here and that will take you to our supported technologies website, where you can find out a lot more. And this, again, we're going to touch on a lot of this over the coming weeks. In fact, I think we've got Webinar Wednesdays taking place after the summer holidays and all the way through up until December as well. These are the tools in the Commvault utility cyber resilient Batman utility belt on there, making sure that their Active Directory is rapid, not just granular, but also recovering entire forests for AD. Making sure, again, they can recover what they've got in SaaS, like Microsoft 365 or Google, having that isolated clean room, but having it where you can spin it up when you need it, you can shut it down when you don't, but built into that, and this is the secret sauce with our clean room, is the automated process to then bring everything within that clean room online. I won't mention the next one because we've talked about that best workload coverage ever, air-gapped and mutable indelible storage on there, and Commvault is built on enterprise level cloud scale recovery as well. So next steps, it's getting your customers to move away from this nightmare, and again, M&S were almost twice the average, to this, really rapidly recovering their data from after they've had a cyber attack, and with the lowest TCO, 5x lower than cloud native backup tools and 3x lower than the competition as well. So there's the link for the ultimate guide to minimum viability. And David mentioned this at the beginning. We have a series of webinars that really start to drill down into the 4 tools that we briefly touched on that will help your customers achieve that minimum viability, and then the wider cyber resilience as well. There's the AD and Entra ID that we're going to focus on the 10th of September. The importance of air gap protect and having then access to a clean copy of your data that you can trust. So that's your clean data sorted out. And obviously threat scan plays a big part in that as well. And then clean room recovery, that clean, sterile environment that can be spun up. And the last one, this is one of the most recent acquisitions that we had, a company called Appranix, where they automated the whole process of cloud infrastructure recovery, and then obviously the data, making it much faster, and that's Cloud Rewind. Okay, so I appreciate I've been banging on for quite some time, so I'm just going to stop the share for the moment and just see if we have any questions at all. So I don't know, David, are you okay to unmute everybody?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to, maybe you could raise your hand and I could then unmute you if you wanted to do that. Absolutely, go ahead and rather than me just unmuting everybody and then everybody being silent. While I'm just saying that, and as I say, so if you do have any questions, put them into the Q&A now. I've got a question actually, Mark, and I don't know. It's one of those that's a sort of $64,000 question, and I don't know whether you know the answer. But right at the start of your presentation, you said that the UK is spending kind of more on cybersecurity than other countries in EMEA, or sort of worse to that effect. Is there a reason behind why the UK are potentially spending more? Is it there's more tech companies here, or is it more, we're trying to be more secure, or?
I think it's a combination of all of those things, but fundamentally in the UK, I think our CISOs who are driving it from the C level down are much more switched on around how can we make sure that we are cyber resilient? But I mentioned that crucial piece that's missing, and that crucial piece is the piece that Commvault can help with.
Yeah.
And we can do that with our partners, is the recovery, the cyber recovery, and making sure that the normal tools that they think about, all those security tools they have on the perimeter of their business, they still need to be there. But it's then what happens from the production environment all the way through to backup, and then beyond backup with that cyber recovery. That's something that traditionally they don't think about. So they're heading in the right direction with we need more money, but they need to make sure that they actually spend it in the right places as well, and include that cyber recovery and think about their data recovery at the same time.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. No, brilliant, thank you. Joel, is there anything you wanted to ask or add while we've got Mark and his expertise?
No, I mean, the thing I was going to cover really well, comment on, was the when I speak to partners, the thing that stands out is basically Commvault's coverage. What's included out the box. They've got the broader support of hypervisor databases. It supports hundreds of snapshots and arrays. So when you kind of compare that to, we're not going to do vendor bashing, but when you compare that to competitors, a lot of that stuff requires additional functionality, or it's not even covered.
Correct.
Commvault's technology is kind of best suited for data consolidation, so you're not having those desperate loads of different tools you're having to manage, having to potentially have support contracts with separate training to have it's an all-encompassing tool for customers to use.
I think that's a really fair point, actually, Joel. And one of the things that I mentioned briefly, the sustainability word, that's not something that's on the top of every single one of your customers' wish list, but it's on there. So if you can provide something that's going to make them more cyber resilient, it's going to reduce their total cost of ownership, but also at the same time makes them more sustainable, that's a great story. And that's one that they can then start pushing out to their customers as well, that we're really trying to reduce our overall impact. In fact, I think within Commvault, it has that CO2 emissions calculator where it will show you, based on you moving over, how much money Commvault and how your impact on the environment, how we've helped you lessen that as well, your carbon footprint.
That's good. And I think the sustainability, I don't call it the argument, but the fact that it's absolutely the way a lot of not just big businesses but small businesses are going as well. So it's absolutely kind of becoming more front of people's minds than ever before.
It's generally part of when customers put out tenders, there's sometimes an element of that tender response is all around sustainability as well. So if you can tick that box, then you've got a much higher chance of winning that tender.
Really good point, mate. Yeah, really good point.
Yeah. Well, while we've been chatting, there's not actually been any more questions posted, so I'm guessing you did such a great job, Mark, but no one had any questions to ask. What I will say, let me just do this really quickly. Mark was obviously talking towards the end there about the other sessions that we've got. As I say, we're having a bit of a break for the for summer during August, but we're going right through September all the way through to December. I think it must be obviously the second Wednesday of every month. But I'm just going to put this in the chat here, and what that is that's the link to kind of our main page. If you want to go and watch this one back on demand, or you wanted to join the rest of the series, and please do that. Mark's just done a really good introduction to why Commvault is actually different, but the remaining series for the year, we're going to have much more of a deep dive into the actual solutions and the technologies that come on. So please do have a look at that. Sorry, Mark, go on.
Yeah, that's a good point there, actually, David, that with the remaining sessions that we've got, each session will start with a high-level overview. Why are these products going to make such a difference to your customers and help them be more cyber resilient? and then there'll be like we'll found a klaxon, a metaphorical klaxon, and then we'll take that technical deep dive. We'll have a demo if anybody has any questions around that. So with the remaining invites, in fact, what I would suggest is if you think what you've heard today is a good idea, and that delving into these products in more depth is also a good idea, but please make sure that you invite, obviously, please turn up yourselves, but get your techie colleagues, your SEs, your solution architects to take part, because they may well drift off a little bit at the beginning, the high level stuff, but when we start talking techie and doing demos, they'll be like, great, okay, this is what I want to hear. And if for those people on the call who aren't techie, if you want to drop off, then that's absolutely fine. And we'll carry on talking techie, but hopefully we'll blend in when we talk techie. Typically when we do a demo, we don't just talk about the super nuts of what we do, the technical aspects. We're also talking about how what we're doing is making a difference. It needs to be that blended conversation anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. And just one final point, I think, before we wrap up. If you are watching this on demand now, this will be on our YouTube channel, hopefully later on today. And you're watching this on demand. The link to join the remaining webinars that we will have, or if it's it's 2026 and you're watching this on demand, it'll all be in the comments section, in the description of this YouTube video. If you are watching this on demand, so yeah, if you want to join the rest of them and you've watched this on demand, that link will be in there, or it's already taken place. Everything will be in there. You'll be able to watch it and stream it all back. So, just say thanks, Joel, and of course thanks, Mark, for presenting. Absolutely fantastic. Looking forward to the next one already. I'm going to get you a Batman utility belt over the summer, so you can wear that on the next one as well. But yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. All right, take care. Thanks everybody.
Bye.
Cheers.
Everybody. Cheers. Bye bye.